Donwell's daughter, Margie, was interviewed by Damaged Goods with No Regrets, February 24th of 2023. She posted the video up on a live February 25th of 2023 and titled it, I Spoke with Donwell's Daughter. Damaged Goods with No Regrets says, everyone deserves to have the truth come out, especially when they're being dragged through the mud, and asks, so what can you tell me about your relationship with your dad? I agree that people deserve to have the truth come out about them too if they're being dragged through the mud and they're actually a good person and don't deserve it. My question is Don Wills a good person? There is a chance that he hurt Summer and hid her somewhere, or that he has knowledge of where she is and what happened to her. There is a very big possibility of that. And there is also a possibility that Summer truly was abducted. However, there is no evidence of that, according to law enforcement. There's also no evidence that we know of that Don has done anything to hurt Summer or that he knows where she is. But Don and Candace are still suspects, and without the information that TBI has, we're just left to speculate. It sucks to have to think that Don could have done something to Summer. I don't want to think that, but it is a possibility. It is a possibility Candace as well has. Don is suspicious and he is a suspect. He has said and done a lot of things to put himself in a bad position on social media during his daughter's disappearance. Then he goes and cries about it and expects people to feel bad for him. He hasn't seemed to do much to try to find Summer. He just gets angry with people online when they don't agree with what he says. Margie says my relationship with my father, honestly, he's one of the best dads I will ever have. Besides his drug problem, he's honestly one of the best. He's always there for you when you need him, and he's always done anything that he could to help me, whether money-wise or someone to talk to. Well, except for when he wasn't around because he was in prison or getting high, which in some cases, being in prison is for very unfortunate circumstances where the person isn't really a bad person, but they got mixed up in something bad and ended up in prison. But what did Don do to go to prison? Because I don't think that's the case with him. He spent a lot of time there, and I can't say it's because he's a good person. Because we know Don to rob people, and we have heard a story of Don trying to sell his kids. People that do stuff like that should be in prison. The problem is, how do we know if it's really true? What has Don done to show us he is a good dad? Forget what he says, that Summer likes to twirl and eat Tic Tacs. What has he actually done? Margie continues. He's never went against anything I said. If I needed to talk to him about something, he would listen and try to help me out with everything like I can't explain it. So it sounds like Don tried to be more of a friend to her than a dad, in my opinion. Better a friend than nothing if she had no one else playing dad to her, but it's also sad. And that's probably because that's just what position Don was in with her, because he was in and out of her life. It's just what it is. Damaged asks, how many kids does your dad have? Margie says, with my mom, he has 2, but with his new wife, Candace, he has 4. Damaged says, so there's 6 children between the 2 marriages, and he was still able to accomplish pretty much anything that he could to help you in everything you experienced in life, which shows he was very attentive to everybody's needs. I don't agree with that statement because I feel Don would have tried harder to not be on drugs, to not lie, cheat, and steal after he had kids if he cared about them so much. He wouldn't expose his children to his addiction, and for so long. Things like that take time, but it doesn't sound like Don ever tried to get clean for his kids. He just kept using drugs and would tell them not to. Margie says, yeah, every time he had his little drug ordeal or whatever, every Friday, well, not every Friday, but every time he messed up on Fridays, I could always count on an hour-long lecture from my dad the next day. Even though I didn't do anything wrong, he would still lecture me so I wouldn't follow in his footsteps. Unfortunately, that's not usually enough, and children that have parents that do drugs usually end up doing drugs. Don didn't seem to care. Damage says, so he's basically telling you to learn from what he's telling you, not from what he's done when he messes up. Margie says, yeah. Damage says, so he knows that you saw and experienced the messed up part, and he probably felt overwhelming guilt from that, and he's trying to explain to you why you shouldn't fall in that pattern. Okay, in my opinion, parenting works a lot better when you just lead by example. But there are things we have to teach our kids, but doing drugs and going on binges on the weekends and your kids know about it, that's a recipe for disaster. Margie says yes, and my dad has always tried to teach me like the stranger ordeal. He always tried to teach me to watch out for people, because he would always tell me there's bad people in this world that will want to kidnap you and stuff like that. We used to watch America's Most Wanted together. That way he could help me understand that it doesn't matter how old you are or how strong you are in this world, someone is out there to always get you. I think that's a pretty normal thing for a dad to teach his daughter. I don't think that's anything extraordinary at all. Though I feel some people would take it as Don is such a great dad because he said this, when in all reality it's just a normal thing a dad should do. Damage says, that's the truth. So he definitely wanted to educate you and made you experience all these different situations so you were ready for the world that you had no idea was going to be in your future. You were experiencing it early enough so you were ahead of the game, which, in my opinion, is super messed up because why would you want to expose your children to something that's essentially making them grow up faster? I don't want my child to be immature, but I don't want them to grow up too fast either. And that can be dangerous. You can put your child in danger making them want to try drugs or hang out with people like her dad hangs out with, or have the same values as her father, who is a drug addict that's in and out of jail and can't be there enough to make sure she is following through with the things he has been teaching her to defer her from drugs. He's not there to make sure she's not doing it, but when he is around, he's doing it around her. And then he disappears for a while. So how does he know? Like, what? Can't you just quit, man? Like, just quit doing it. Margie says, yeah. Damage asks, when he went on his binges or on the weekend when he decided to mess up and use something, was that time that he was using, even though it was short-lived? Did that ever affect your relationship with him or any of your siblings? And I know getting off drugs is not easy. Listen, I've been clean for 5 years. I'm saying it's something that you have to do for your kids. And if you don't, then that's your choice. If you decide to just continue doing it and be like, it'll be okay, I'll just tell my kids not to do it. But then your kids still have to deal with all the repercussions of your drug use. So it's still not fair at the end of the day. So she asked if it ever affected her relationship with him or any of her siblings. Which, in my opinion, how could it not? How could that not affect their entire life, that their dad is on drugs and going on binges on the weekends? Then the kids also have to deal with Don's come down and his mood swings and everything else that comes along with using drugs. It's not just about when you're high, when you're on drugs. It's your attitude when you don't have the drugs that can also be dangerous. Margie says no, but him and her mom fought about Don's drug use and partying a lot. That probably had a negative effect on the children as well. Parents fighting a lot can cause depression and anxiety in children that they themselves cannot recognize, which can cause them to be confused why they feel that way and to suffer, and that can be lifelong. Damage says, yeah, your mom probably wanted what's best, and to her, in her eyes, that's not what was best. Well, in my eyes, that's not what was best for the kids. In anybody's eyes, that should not be what's best for a child, ever. And if a parent thinks that's what's best for a child, they should be locked up, in my opinion. Margie says, yeah, I don't even know. I think she knows it was bad that her dad had a drug problem, but she is trying to help him and stick up for him in this interview to try to make him look good, because he's being dragged through the mud, so to speak. So, of course, she isn't going to know exactly how to talk about his bad behavior in that regard. Damaged asks, was he full-time hands-on involved with the family, involved with the kids? Just because you're home and you're present physically doesn't mean you're involved. Did he try to be in your lives all the time, no matter what? Damaged asks. Oh, yeah, says Margie. There's times my dad would take me and my friends to go play basketball together, and he wouldn't take just my friends, he would take half the neighborhood. Damage says, so he was just like a friendly neighborhood dad? Well, I wouldn't want him driving anywhere with any of my children. Hopefully he wasn't drunk or high while he was driving them. Margie says, yeah. I remember one time me and my best friend rode bikes together on that bike trail at night, and my dad followed behind us on his motorcycle. I loved it. Because of all the past accusations with Don and the motorcycle, that part honestly gave me the chills. Damaged says, from what Margie makes it sound like, Don was happy-go-lucky. He was a part of her life, and she says she thinks that he was very blessed and honored to be your father. Margie says, oh yeah, there were times my dad was in prison and I wouldn't see him for long periods of time. But anytime he was there, he always made the best of it. Do you see what I mean about how Don tried to be like her friend rather than her dad? Because he knew it was going to be too hard to parent her without being there all the time, so he just became like the fun uncle to her, in my opinion. Margie continues, he even took us to work with him and taught us how to work. He even taught me how to spot nails. I loved it. Which we know Don was all about taking the kids to work because he has talked about it himself and we have seen the pictures. Margie says, I loved seeing the houses he was helping build or whatever, and I loved it. Damage says, so he was definitely very hands-on and did the whole take the kids to work day. Damage says she can only imagine she was over the hills excited to work with her dad. Margie was like, oh yeah. Then the big question I think Damaged was waiting to get out. She says, there are some allegations going around on YouTube about a CPS case from the year 1994. And I'm not going to lie, I have heard a lot of mixed things about this over the past 2 years or so, and I've never got involved in studying it because I didn't have the facts to base anything I said on. I can give my opinion, but that doesn't make it the truth. So you would like to speak on this a little bit, you told me, just to help your dad and let everyone understand coming from his daughter's mouth what the situation actually was. So I'll let you tell us about that. Okay, so there was a CPS case from 94 that allegedly Don's name was on, and Margie was being essayed in this report. Margie is here saying no, it wasn't Don. It was 3 other dudes, and I say dudes because I think a couple of them may have been children at the time, and I'm not sure on that just based on the way she speaks on it. And sounds like one may have been an adult, so I didn't want to say guys or men because I wasn't sure. So I just said dudes. Margie says, when I was 3, I was living with my mother, and I can't remember exactly who all was living with us at the time, but I do know at the time I was being, trigger warning, molested by 3 different people. I was being molested by my half-brother, my foster brother, that my mom adopted off the street, and a family member from my step-aunt's side of the family. His name was JR, I guess. He's Debbie's son or something like that. That's terrible. I'm sorry she had to go through that. Damage says, so you no longer have contact with the step family? Margie says, I have not talked to any of them besides Jeannie and Trish and all them, like 10 years ago. The only one I can even remember actually ever talking to was Jeannie, and that's because she had 3 kids. Honestly, I don't ever remember them being nice to me at all, so I don't know why I would have tried to talk to them. I think I would have tried to talk to my Aunt Sonia before I talked to them. So here, Margie is making Sonia sound credible and nice, and Jeannie and Trish sound mean. Like, don't listen to them. So I found that very interesting. I wonder what conversation she had with her dad prior to this interview. I also wonder if she was paid for this. Just curious. I could see Don being like, tell them how Jeannie and Trish are bees and Sonia is cool, because he likes what Sonia has to say and not what Jeannie and Trish have to say, obviously, because of their claims. So in a way, very subtly, I feel this was a way of bringing attention to his stepsisters because bringing negative attention to them because Don always has to bring them up in a bad light. And I feel he was behind this in some way. At the end of the day, I don't know. Damage says, "Did you tell your dad what was going on?" Meaning her being essayed. She says at the time, probably not, but he does know now. Now that I'm able to open up about it, because back then I was too scared to talk to people, which is very common amongst victims, and I'm sorry Margie had to go through any form of abuse in her life. Damage says, "I'm sure they intimidated you also. That's very sad. Now these allegations about the CPS case are made towards your dad. They are saying that Don Wells was doing all these things to you. In fact, you're saying it was not your father, it was the 3 other people." Damage asks, she knows it was a long time ago, but does she know, was he incarcerated at the time or home? She says he was either incarcerated or living around somewhere. So it sounds like Don left more than just on the weekend binges and because of prison. Damage says, "Did you at least reside pretty within close proximity of your dad's house?" Margie says, "He didn't live outside our house, besides prison or a halfway house that I can remember. But if he did live anywhere else, it would probably be his dad's house or something like that." It sounds like Margie's childhood could possibly be a bit of a blur, which is totally understandable. Maybe Don really wasn't there as much as one would think. Sounds like he was gone a lot. He was probably around half the time to be her friend and never to father her, and he probably was blind to any damage he was doing to his kids back then. Or today. Damaged says, "So as of right now, we're saying that your father in absolutely zero way, in no way at all, has ever done anything to hurt you or violate you." Margie says, "In no way at all." Damaged says, "Before we started recording, you expressed you wanted to help your dad, and since you were involved in this case, you're the only person that can truly sit there and say, no, he's innocent. These other people did this to me. My dad isn't guilty at all." She says you're very brave. It takes a very strong person to come out and say this, which here I will have to agree with Damaged because it definitely takes a lot more than just guts to come forward with your trauma. Damaged asks, "Do you have a relationship with him and Candace? I know you said the stepfamily was crappy, but do you and Candace get along all right and everything?" Margie says, "Yeah, it was about 11 years ago, and they only had 2 kids at the time, but we lived with them for about 6 months before we moved back to Arkansas." She says they're like any other couple, they fight. I find it interesting that she only takes the time to say of Don and Candace's relationship that they fight. Damage says, "Right, no relationship is perfect," which she's right. Margie says, "My dad's always been a hard worker." Damage says, "How is he with the kids?" Margie says he's great. I remember one time we like to play practical jokes on people a lot. Damage says her husband, which is White Boy Lockdown Radio, who supports Don also, has spoken with Don before a few times, and she thinks he seems like he can be a real funny dude, just a regular good old boy. Damage says, "He seems fun, like you don't know what to expect, like the light of the party kind of guy." In my opinion, Don could be that, but I bet he's also the reason why the party stops sometimes too. Don gets abusive when he drinks. I can't imagine how he would be with meth and coke on top. Margie says they would get together and kind of gang up on people. They would have fun with it. I love it, she says. Margie says she doesn't think her dad would do anything to hurt any of his children. Damage says she's asking because a lot of the things that happened with Summer, she knows a lot of the things she can't speak about, but she knows Margie can honestly give her opinion if there was only any involvement at all on her father or stepmother. Margie says, "I don't think either one of them have anything to do with Summer's disappearance. Like I said, my dad loves his kids, and his girls to him are so precious. So if Summer was kidnapped, maybe someone knew how precious Summer was to Don. But in my mind, I feel he would know who it was or have a good idea of who it could have been. All he would have to do is think of all the people he ripped off for what, and there would probably be his answer if I had to guess. I can tell that it's really hurt him, says Margie. He's come up here to visit me a couple times, and I can tell by the look on his face that it's just not him anymore. It's like taking Summer away from him has taken a lot away from him. It's his whole personality has changed. And it's kind of hard to see my dad now. And it's like, I feel like it's hard to be there for him, and because I don't know what to say or do for him. I didn't realize Margie was such a big part of Don's life. I haven't heard him ever talk about her besides when he was referring to her on her 18th birthday and how she had been sexually assaulted and didn't go cry about it and go make a big deal about it or whatever terrible thing he said about that tragic situation, which he treated like a paper cut. Damage says, knowing that you have the best intention at heart and he has your support, that means more than you think. And you have to understand, YouTube is a huge land. A lot of them are crazies that take advantage and they lie. One thing my husband and I are both known for is we don't lie. And I don't care if I hurt your feelings or not. You're going to hear the truth from me. And well, that's just my personality. And that's my husband's personality as well. And that's why we think it's very important that by doing this with you, I'm going to play it on my live another day. I'll text you and see if you want to talk about anything else, or even if you want to come on. And if you do, you don't have to show your face. I want your privacy always to be the first thing that we focus on. So you can sit there and keep your camera off and you can talk about anything you want to. I know Don is not allowed to speak about anybody about the boys. Hence the gag order that Don doesn't seem to care about at all, though he says he doesn't want to disrespect the court because they can throw him in jail. He still talks about the boys anyways. Damage asks, are you allowed to mention them in any way? Margie says, nobody ever said anything to me about it. Damage says, I guess my question is, they were equally as loved and cared for as you and Summer and his grandkids. So do you think he deserves his children back? She says, I think he does. I think he needs them, honestly. I would have to disagree with this because I don't think he deserves them back if he couldn't even complete a plan to get them back. I know sometimes the system is a little corrupt and people that complete all they need to still don't get their kids back, but I don't think that's the case here. Damage says losing a child in any way, shape, or form destroys a parent. You've never imagined your life without your kids. She says, I shelter my kids a lot, so I didn't realize I was doing it before till my older son was so sheltered that, he used to get mad because I wouldn't let him go anywhere. Damaged asks, do you have a memory that stands out that you want to share a story about your dad? An amazing, fun story you want to share just to give a more personal insight to his life as a dad? Like any stories you talk about with your kids, little goofy things you talked about? Excuse me. Margie says, all I can really say is, the best description I have for my dad is my dad reminds me of, and then she finally says, Home Improvement, Tim Allen, the tool guy. That would be my dad right there. He wouldn't be as stupid as that guy is on there, but Damaged Goods jokes with her a little bit, and they talk for a minute about that. He was always the one there to try to teach me about cars and tools. He just wanted to make sure we always knew what we needed in life, what was the best out of the best, and So basically dad things is what she is describing, but not really even basic dad things, because Don is lacking in the fact that he's only there half the time and he's out doing drugs, and his kids know about it. Were they exposed to it firsthand, I wonder? Damage says, I think that's awesome. She says, I'm going to ask a question. If you don't want to answer this, just say I don't want to speak about it, and it's fine, we'll move on. There have been allegations that your father was giving sedatives to children, and then questionable things may or may not have been happening to these children after they were passed out. Can you give your opinion on that? Because a neighbor of his said it, Jody Sue, and I don't trust anything that comes out of that woman's mouth. Margie says, I have never witnessed anything like that in my life, honestly. He's never done that to me, and when I lived up there for 6 months, he never did that to his kids. Like I said, my dad gets up early in the morning. He didn't get home till 5 or 6 at night, and when he comes home sometimes, he cooks dinner, which sometimes can turn out a little scary. My question is, how does cooking dinner turn into something scary? Unless there's a fire or something? Was he cooking intoxicated and making the kids scared or what? They joke around a little for a minute. Even if he wasn't the best at everything he did for you guys, you can honestly say that no matter what he did, he tried and he gave it his all. And Margie says, yes, he did. He was one of the best dads you could ever ask for, except for the drug problem. So his drug problem made him not so good of a dad, according to Margie. Because I wonder what Margie had to go through because of her dad's drug problem that she didn't even realize she was going through because Don normalized that kind of life to her. Damaged asks, was that an on and off thing your entire life? I don't know how long he's had issues. Margie says, he's had issues since he was a young teenage boy. Damage says, yeah, that's a hard devil to kick. She's right, it is. But it's possible and it's easy and doable if you have the willpower and the motivation. It's doable. I shouldn't say easy, but it's doable. But Don keeps going through his life, continuing to be on drugs regardless of his kids or whatever he has going on. Margie says, yeah, I am actually very proud of him, which maybe he's clean today, who knows. But it doesn't seem like he was leading up to Summer's disappearance. Damage says, with all of this that has happened, this is not in any way insulting or demeaning Candace, but she has had a stroke. Your dad had informed us. I can only imagine how hard that was for them to have to go through that. It's completely natural for that to happen with anybody. How has she been since she had a stroke, and how has your dad been coping with this? Margie says, honestly, I haven't talked to her much recently. I can tell she's not doing too well without her kids. I mean, they were everything to her. I'm surprised Margie knows so much because I thought she was from Arkansas. I don't know. She was so close. I didn't know she was so close to her dad and Candace.
Run down the street, okay?
I have never heard them talk about her besides the one thing Don said about her. So I've never heard them talk about her besides the one thing Don said about her, which was terrible. Damage says, absolutely, that's just what happened. I understand it. I probably would have lost my mind. I don't know if I'd still be walking around if anything happened to any of my kids. Damage says, so what is the biggest goal right now, other than to find Summer? What do you think their biggest goal is as a family? Margie says, just trying to get their kids back. I think that's the only thing they're really working on right now. Well, they clearly have priorities above their kids. Hopefully there is some evidence in Summer's case, and maybe that's what led them to take the kids, regardless of Don or Candace being high and drunk. But either way, they had to quit in order to get their children, and they didn't quit. That was the bare minimum, and they couldn't do that. Clearly. Margie goes on. They can't see any of their goal right now other than trying to get their kids. That's all they talk about, which I don't believe. Damage says, yeah, they won't rest till it happens. I know that for a fact. So with the allegations regarding CPS in 94, that was a false report. Or is this just a rumor that was made up because people hear things? And Margie says, I don't know. I haven't even heard about it myself. Damage says, so you just found out about it and that's why you wanted to come talk about it and explain that it never happened. Margie says, yeah. Damage asks, did he ever teach you how to play cards? Margie says, oh yeah, he taught me to shuffle cards and do a couple card tricks. I didn't understand the importance of that question, but maybe she was just trying to hear some things they did together. Damage says, I think your dad sounds like a pretty run-of-the-mill normal dad, except Everyday run-of-the-mill normal dads don't run off on the weekends and do drugs and go on binges and end up in prison half their life, and probably continue doing drugs throughout the week too, because that's how drug addicts are. Damage says, my parents never had any issues with drugs, but my dad is always talking about playing sports and working on cars and, cards. I can't tell you how many stories about your dad. My parents were always very involved as well. Like mine, they just wanted the best for everybody in their lives, regardless of the situation and circumstances. And I think your dad kind of feels he didn't do enough because he did so much and he did try so hard. But at the end of the day, this tragedy still fell on your family. So he must feel some type of guilt, like, what did I do wrong or what didn't I do right to prevent this? Or, in my opinion, Don knows exactly. There is that possibility too, and it's not that far-fetched at all. And it's actually probable, in my opinion, that Don does know where Summer is. And I doubt that he feels as distraught over it in the same way that everybody thinks he does. Because I think he might be distraught, but not because he doesn't know where his daughter is, because in my mind, I feel like he does. And that's my opinion, and I'm entitled to that. Damage says, I didn't seem like it was anything anyone did. It was just something that happened. And how do you know it's going to happen? You can't tell the future. Damage asks if there's anything before we cut the recording off that you think is important that you want everyone to know about you, your family, or Don, your father. Margie says there's one thing. My dad, almost every single time I talk to him, he talks about this time when I was 15. He had gone and done some drugs, and he ended up selling his car. And I had to walk 2 miles to town for a doctor's appointment. And he walked with me, and he felt so bad. And every time he talks to me now, he has to apologize for that. Damage says it still weighs heavily on his mind. Margie says, yeah, seeing him when I was pregnant tore him up. Was Margie pregnant at 15? Margie says I did it every week anyways. He always had the car at work, so I always had to walk everywhere I went, so it never bothered me, but it bothered him watching me do it, and he felt bad. I would hope so. I would feel bad too. He should feel bad for that. Damage says, yeah, it was his fault in his head. He forced you to have to do this, even though he didn't intend on this being the situation. Parents will carry guilt for certain things they've done, and sometimes it's a lifelong guilt, but at least he apologized for it. That is the very least he could have done. And you've told him gracefully many times, it is what it is. Jeez. Margie says, yeah, I keep trying to tell him he's the best father in the world, and I would never trade him for anybody. I wonder how often they actually talk. Damage says, my kids say that too, and I know that I'm not the best, and there's always room for improvement. Of course. Don is having a learning experience. Here you are, after all the nasty, the lies, the rumors, and the attacks, just putting yourself out there and coming on and speaking to me and allowing me to record it and go live later on to explain to people the things they don't know about your dad. These aren't things we didn't know about Don. These are just things Margie is saying to try to make her dad look like a good guy because she felt bad for him, in my opinion. Not because he was actually a good dad, and that's my opinion. Damage says there was never anything about him involved in this case. You told us things about people involved and you didn't have to go that far. Well, she did have to go that far if she wanted people to understand what she was trying to say, because otherwise people probably wouldn't have believed her, which is sad but true. But no, she didn't have to do anything. Damage says, he's your dad. You want to protect him and you tell the truth. Well, we don't know if she tells the truth, the whole truth, or just the pretty part of the truth. Damage wants to end the recording there, and if you want to hear verbatim what is said, you have to go over to her channel, Damaged Goods with No Regrets, and watch it there, because this is mostly word for word, but there is a little bit that I left out. Things that are added in by Damaged Goods and things they say joking around that I cut out. There's also a lot Damaged Goods with No Regrets has to say at the end after the call is over that you may want to hear for yourself. That was it. That was the call. So I just wanted to put that out there and put my opinion out there too, because that's what I do. And Thank you for being here for summer and with me. I appreciate it. The internet always goes so slow when I'm running StreamYard. Appalachian princess, can't look away. Appalachian princess, too beautiful to say. Appalachian princess. Appalachian princess, but you got run away. Appalachian princess, we will figure out a way to get you out of this mess. Can't shut me up, I will be here fighting. Can't brush me off, we're thunder and lightning. She goes, we follow, not scared of no hollow. We want you to stay, Appalachian princess, but you got gone away, Appalachian princess. We will figure out a way to get you out of this mess. They thought it could hide our Appalachian princess, but we're here to find you, Appalachian princess. Can't look away, Appalachian princess, too beautiful to say. Appalachian princess, can't shut me up, I will be here fighting. Can't brush me off with thunder and lightning. She goes, we follow, not scared of no hollow. We want you to stay, Appalachian princess, but you got gone away, Appalachian princess. We'll figure out a way to get you out of this mess. They thought we could hire Appalachian princess, but we're here to find you, Appalachian princess. Can't look away, Appalachian princess, too beautiful to say, Appalachian princess. Appalachian princess. Alright, thank you for being here for summer. Appreciate you guys. Thanks for chatting with me and listening to this phone call between Damaged Goods with No Regrets and Donwell's daughter, Margie, his oldest daughter. Again, the video is titled I Spoke with Donwell's Daughter, and it's on Damaged Goods with No Regrets' page, and it was live streamed February 25th of 2023. All right. Summer, we love you, and we will continue to be here for you and share your picture and your face every day, and we're not going to stop. And I love you guys, and thanks for being here.